World food commodity prices fall in November. India's trade with Russia will reach $100 billion before their 2030 target. And the EU fines Musk's ex €120 million for breaching the Digital Services Act. Welcome back to our economic bulletin. We start off with the global news as World Trade Organization reported that nearly 20% of world imports are now affected by tariffs and trade restrictions, up from 12.6% a year ago, marking the highest coverage in over 15 years. The WTO Director General, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, warned the global trading system faces its most severe turbulence in 80 years due to rising unilateral tariffs, geopolitical tensions, and regional conflicts. Despite this, about 72% of global trade still occurs under most favored nation terms. The WTO plans further monitoring and assessment in the coming weeks. The Food and Agricultural Organization FAO has reported that the world food commodity prices fell in November, led by drops in vegetable oils, dairy, meat, and sugar. The FAO Food Price Index averaged at 125.1 points, down 1.2% from October and 21.9% below the March 2022 peak. The drop was led by sugar, which fell 5.9%, and dairy, which declined 3.1%. Cereal prices were the exception, rising 1.3% due to supply concerns from potential Chinese demand, Black Sea hostilities, and lower expected Russian plantings. Despite this monthly increase, the FAO forecast a record global cereal harvest in 2025, surpassing 3 billion tons for the first time. In Europe, policymaker François Villeroy-de-Galhau has stated that European Central Bank needs to keep its policy options open at upcoming rate-setting meetings, as downside inflation risks are as significant as upside ones. She noted that the upside risks included the fragmentation of global supply chains and increased public spending in Germany, while downside risks stemmed from slower wage growth, a stronger euro, and cheaper imports from China. Galhau added that while the risks of price stability currently cut equally both ways, the ECB cannot tolerate a lasting and undershooting of its inflation target. The Economic Institute IW has expected Germany's economic recovery to remain weak next year as exports falter and global trade slows, projecting real gross domestic product growth of just 0.1% this year after 2 years of contraction, rising 0.9% in 2026. However, IW noted that roughly a third of next year's increase reflects a calendar effect, with nearly 2.5 more working days than in 2025. Germany's tax and social contribution ratio is set to climb to a record 41.5% of GDP in 2025, up from 40.2% last year. IW said consumer spending will remain subdued despite inflation stabilizing around 2%. Unemployment is expected to remain close to 3 million and employment to stagnant. The institute also forecasts that the debt-to-GDP ratio to rise at 66%, with government spending surpassing 50% of economic output, highlighting mounting fiscal pressures. Still in Germany, the Federal Statistical Office reported a stronger than expected rise in industrial orders for October, though economists warned that the increase was driven by large one-off contracts rather than a broad recovery. Orders rose 1.5% month-on-month on a seasonally and calendar-adjusted basis, boosted by an 87.1% surge in the other transport equipment category. Excluding these big-ticket items, orders were up 0.5%. Foreign orders fell 4% in the less volatile three-month comparison. Orders from August to October were 0.5% lower than the previous 3 months. Revised figures also showed September orders rose 2% from August, up from the initial estimate of 1.1%. As for the German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, he narrowly pushed a €185 billion pensions bill through the Bundestag on Friday, winning 318 votes after a revolt in his conservative bloc threatened its passage. The far-right opposition party Alternative for Germany, AfD, lawmakers accused Merz of nearly relying on left-wing extremists for support, while Greens pointed to earlier coalition missteps. The close call highlighted strains with Merz's Conservative Social Democratic Party coalition and renewed doubts about its ability to deliver key economic and defence reforms. The turmoil has boosted the far-right AfD, now leading national polls ahead of next year's state elections.
Das sehen die Amerikaner zum Teil auch so. Sie möchten da einen Vorsitzenden herzlich danken, meiner pfälzischen Ministerpräsidenten Alexander Schweitzer.
Still in Europe and over in the UK, the Bank of England and the Financial Conduct Authority have announced a package of measures aimed at supporting Britain's mutual sectors. The plans seek to speed up application processes, review credit union regulations, and make it easier for mutuals to cooperate. CEO of the Prudential Regulation Authority, Sam Woods, said that the report highlights the growing role of financial mutuals in the system and considers how best to support their continued growth. We now go live to Washington, where the U.S. President Donald Trump is presiding over the draw for the 2026 FIFA World Cup as the tournament counts down to kick off across the United States, Canada, and Mexico.
I did settle 8 wars, and we have a 9th coming, which nobody's ever done before. But I want to really save lives. I don't need prizes. I need to save lives, and we're saving a lot of lives. I've saved millions and millions of lives, and that's really what I want to do. And I also want to run a great country. And the United States right now is the hottest country anywhere in the world. And 1 year ago it was dead. We had a dead country, and now we have the hottest country anywhere in the world.
Mr. President, discuss Canada and Mexico, Mr. But what are you going to discuss with the leaders?
Well, we're going to meet with both, and we're getting along very well. You know, we're getting along very well. I don't know. I think we have a meeting set up for sometime after the event.
We'll discuss trade.
Yeah, we'll discuss trade. We get along very well. Thank you, everybody, very much.
So, will you pardon any other Honduran officials?
Do you want them to keep trying to indict this gentleman? Thank you, press. Let's go.
All the travel pool, we're going to go. That That was part of the opening session for the 2026 FIFA World Cup draw, where President Trump is presiding. And now we go back to the economic bulletin, where mortgage lender Halifax has revealed that Britain's housing market slowed in November in both annual and monthly terms in the run-up to the government's budget. Data showed that house prices were flat in November, down from 0.5% growth in October. Compared to a year ago, house price growth slowed to a 0.7% from an annual increase of 1.9% in October, the weakest rate since March 2024. Halifax noted that the annual slowdown largely reflected the impact of stronger house price growth a year ago. On intercontinental trade, the Russian President Vladimir Putin and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi have agreed to expand trade beyond oil and defense, even as Western nations press India to distance itself from Moscow. Putin's first visit since 2022 to India comes as the latter negotiates with the US to ease Trump-era tariffs tied to its Russian oil purchases. Both sides signal plans to diversify economic cooperation, with Russia seeking more Indian support and exports. Putin said Moscow is ready to work with India in digital transformation, robotics, pharmaceuticals, and artificial intelligence, and confirmed Russia will join India's AI summit in February 2026. President Vladimir Putin has stated that Russia is ready to provide uninterrupted fuel supplies for India.
Успешно развивается партнерство в энергетике. Россия является надежным поставщиком энергоресурсов и всего, что необходимо для развития энергетики. Мы готовы и далее обеспечивать бесперебойную поставку топлива для быстро растущей индийской экономики. Вместе с единомышленниками по БРИКС, ШОС и из числа других государств мирового большинства мы продвигаем процессы формирования более справедливого и демократического многополярного мироустройства. Отстаиваем основополагающие принципы международного права, закрепленные в Уставе Организации Объединенных Наций.
For his part, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi stated that trade with Russia will reach $100 billion before the 2030 target. This came as Russia said it wants to import more Indian goods in an effort to grow trade to $100 billion by 2030. It has so far been skewed in Moscow's favor due to New Delhi's energy imports. India remains a top buyer of Russian oil and arms, deepening cooperation despite Western pressure to distance from Moscow. The push to balance trade, currently skewed towards Russian exports, coincides with India's separate trade talks with the United States. To talk to us more about this, we're joined from Moscow by visiting lecturer at the Higher School of Economics, Rami Qadoubi. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on Qnews.
Good evening.
Thank you. Let's start off by asking about India and Russia. They aim to reach $100 billion in trade by 2030. How realistic is this target, given the current trade imbalance favoring Russian exports?
Actually, since 2022, when Russia started war in Ukraine, China and India became main importers of Russian oil. So, and as a result, the mutual trade doubled few times. And actually, now India is under American pressure because of its purchases of Russian oil. But at the same time, India shows a political will to continue cooperation with Russia, and at this point of view, these ambitious numbers are quite realistic.
So do you think that the Indians may possibly buckle under the pressure by the Americans when it comes to the tariffs, that they might, push back or hold back when it comes to the Russians?
Actually, India plays a double has relations with the United States and with the Soviet Union, and India is a partner of the United States, but at the same time, all of the negotiations of weapons and Russian oil, and at this point, India understands that it's a huge country, the most populous country in the world, with more than 1.4 billion citizens, and that it's a nuclear superpower, and at this point, really, the United States cannot punish India for cooperation with Russia, and at this point, India understands its strong points and continues to diversify its external policy.
Since we're talking about diversification here, now beyond oil and defense, which sectors do you think are of the most potential when it comes to Indian-Russian trade expansion?
When we about Russian-Indian cooperation, the two main fields are military cooperation or military technical cooperation, energy. Russia constructed a nuclear plant in Russia. Russia provides India with oil, and actually India managed to develop the refinery sector due to Russian cheap, relatively cheap, because Russia provides discounts because Russian oil is sanctioned in the West. And these are two very promising sectors. In case if war in Ukraine ends, in this case, Russia will have extra weapons to sell them to India and other partners.
They also talked about, cooperation when it comes to artificial intelligence. How important is this for the Indians and the Russians? What benefits?
Actually, Putin was very clear when he mentioned there are some sectors in high technology where Russia and India could cooperate, and obviously artificial intellect space are among of them. And this point.
Yes. Are you still with us, Mr. Rami? Well, it seems that the phone call there has been cut off. I'd like to thank Mr. Rami there for visiting lecturer in Moscow at the Higher School of Economics. Rami Qadoubi, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your insights. We're going to try to get back soon. And still in India, the Reserve Bank of India lowered its repo rate by 25 basis points to 5.25%, keeping the door open for further cuts to support growth and banking liquidity. RBI Governor Sanjay Malhotra cited strong growth and record low inflation at 0.25%, raising GDP forecast to 7.3%. The central bank will conduct 1 trillion rupees in bond purchases and $5 billion in forex swaps to ease liquidity. India's foreign reserves of $686 billion provide robust import cover, and the RBI will allow the rupee to fluctuate, intervening only to curb excessive volatility. Japan's Economic Revitalization Minister Minoru Kiyoshi has urged the Bank of Japan to maintain close communication with the government when setting monetary policy, while stopping short of opposing a possible near-term rate hike. He stressed that specific policy decisions rest with the BOJ and expected the bank to act in line with its rules requiring coordination with the government. Koichi added that the hopes of the BOJ continuing to steer policy appropriately to achieve 2% inflation target. Internal Affairs Ministry data has revealed that Japanese household spending unexpectedly slumped in the fastest pace in nearly 2 years in October, raising concerns about the economic outlook as the Bank of Japan gears up for a rate hike as early as this month. On a seasonally adjusted month-on-month basis, spending dropped 3.5% versus an estimated 0.7% uptick. An Internal Affairs Ministry official said that the overall decrease was due to lower spending on food, entertainment and automobile-related expenses. However, the official added it was unclear whether the decrease was on one-off and the overall consumption was still at a recovery stage. Statistics Canada has stated that Canada's jobless rate dropped to 6.5% in November as 53,600 jobs were added, led by part-time gains in healthcare social assistance. Youth employment rose 50,000, lowering the youth unemployment rate to 12.8%, while core-age employment remained steady. Wage growth held at 4%, and the report supports expectations the Bank of Canada will keep rates steady. The Canadian dollar rose on the data. The University of Michigan's preliminary survey has shown the U.S. consumer sentiment rose modestly in early December, though concerns over high prices in the labor market persisted. The Consumer Sentiment Index increased to 53.3 from 51 in November, slightly above forecasts. Survey Director Joanne Zhu said that views remained broadly somber, as consumers still feel burdened by high costs, while labor market expectations improved only slightly. The survey also showed some easing in inflation expectations, with the one-year outlook falling 4.1% from 4.5% and five-year outlook dipping to 3.2% from 3.4%. U.S. consumer spending growth moderated in September, rising 0.3% from 0.5% gains in August, signaling fading economic momentum as households grapple with a weaker labor market and higher costs. The Commerce Department delayed reports highlights a divided K-shaped recovery, with spending supported by higher income households but strained for others by the stagnant wages and lingering Trump-era tariffs. Inflation remained elevated, with the core personal consumption expenditures price index, the Federal Reserve's preferred gauge, up 2.8% from a year earlier. The data is not expected to prevent the Fed from cutting interest rates next week, with markets anticipating a quarter-point reduction. Morgan Stanley has expected the U.S. Federal Reserve to deliver a 25 basis point rate cut in December, aligning with J.P. Morgan and Bank of America after recent dovish comments from the Fed policymakers. The bank stated that they jumped the gun, adding that they anticipated dissent and expect Chair Powell to trade the December cut for stronger guidance, signaling that further cuts will face a higher bar. Morgan Stanley also forecasts additional 25 basis point cuts in January and April, bringing rates to a terminal range of 3% to 3.25%, trimming its earlier projection that included another cut in June. The European Union has fined Elon Musk's social media company X €120 million for breaching the Digital Service Act. The European Commission said the fine was proportionate and aimed at enforcing digital rules, not censoring content. TikTok avoided a penalty after pledging changes to its ad transparency, while investigations into other platforms, including TikTok and Qnews, continue. X has 60 to 90 working days to implement corrective measures. DSA fines can reach up to 6% of the company's global annual revenue. The U.S. government criticized the EU crackdown as a targeting of American firms. Italy's economy ministry has ordered a detailed review of safeguarding against cryptocurrency-related risks. He warned that these risks could grow as crypto assets become more intertwined with the financial system and as global regulation remains fragmented. The committee responsible for safeguarding financial stability said Italy's economic and financial conditions are broadly favorable, though set against a backdrop of heightened global uncertainty. Denmark's central bank has released new coins with the insignia of King Frederick X. The new one, 2, 5, and 10, as well as 20 crown coins were released into circulation on December 2nd, with some bearing the king's portrait and others different motifs related to the monarchy. Netflix has agreed to acquire Warner Brothers' Discovery Studio and streaming division for $72 billion, a deal that would turn the streaming leader into a Hollywood superpower but faces significant antitrust scrutiny. The agreement hands Netflix control of Warner Brothers' vast content library, including franchises like Harry Potter and Game of Thrones, as well as the HBO Max service. The move marks a strategic shift for Netflix, which has long focused on building rather than buying content. The acquisition, which ended a weeks-long bidding war, is expected to draw close regulatory examination in the US and Europe over competition concerns in the streaming markets. Global stock markets showed mixed results on Friday. In the U.S., the Nasdaq inched up 0.16% and the S&P 500 rose 0.23%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 0.27%. In Europe, Germany's DAX increased 0.82%, France's CAC 40 edged up 0.02%, while Britain's FTSE 100 fell 0.34%. Across Asia, Japan's Nikkei 225 dropped 1.05%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng rose 0.58% and China's Shanghai Composite jumped 0.7%. Oil prices were steady on Friday, supported by stalled Ukraine peace talks, though gains were offset by expectations of a supply glut. Brent crude was down 0.1% at $63.19 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate dipped 0.2% at $59.57 a barrel. For the week, Brent was largely stable, and WTI was on track to log a gain of about 1.7%, marking a second straight weekly increase. Gold prices rose 1% and were on track for a weekly gain as growing expectations of a U.S. Federal Reserve cut next week pressured the dollar, while silver reached a record high. Spot gold was up 1.1% at $4,255.59 per ounce and was on track for a 0.5% weekly gain. U.S. gold futures for February delivery were up 1% to $4,286.90 per ounce. The U.S. dollar index fell 0.1%, making gold more attractive for buyers using other currencies. Lower interest rates tend to benefit gold, which does not offer a yield. Silver rose 3.6% to $59.19 an ounce, up 4.7% for the week after touching a record $59.32 earlier. That brings us to the end of our economic bulletin. Here's what we've been covering. World food commodity prices fall in November. India's trade with Russia will reach $100 billion before their 2030 target. And EU fines Musk's €120 million for breaching the Digital Service Act. This concludes our economic bulletin. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok using the handle @QNewsEUY to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates here on Qnews.